We have many partners in our efforts to reach the top 10 by 20 in Missouri. One of our partners and a group that we've worked closely with and continue to work closely with is the Missouri NAACP. Here with us today, or will be shortly, is Mary Ratcliffe, President of the Missouri NAACP, Adolphus Pruitt, President of the St. Louis NAACP, and I know Wale is here already, Wale Musa, who is Chair of the Missouri NAACP Education Committee. Would you please, if you're here, Wale, please stand and please give them a round of applause. We're very grateful for their support, along with St. Louis Civic Progress, for sponsoring our next speaker today. Dr. Ronald F. Ferguson's teaching, consulting, and research over more than 3 decades has focused on reducing economic and educational disparities. He's the creator of the Tripod Project for School Improvement, the faculty co-chair and director of the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard University, and faculty co-director of the Pathways to Prosperity Project at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's taught at Harvard University since 1983. His recent work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Project on the measures of effective teaching has found that student perceptions of teaching using his Tripod Project survey help to predict learning gains in public school classrooms. His report, which is one of the foundations that we're using here in Missouri, of Pathways to Prosperity, he's co-author with Robert Schwartz on that, has added fuel to the national debate on how to help all youth, not just college-bound, transition successfully from school to work. Some of you know that Missouri is a Pathways to Prosperity state, and soon we'll be having a Mid-Missouri Summit as well as a Kansas City area summit to spread those pilots statewide. He's earned his undergraduate degree from Cornell University and a PhD from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, both in economics. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Ron Ferguson.
Is this on? Okay, it is. Great. It's nice to be here with you on a sunny Sunday afternoon, so shows your dedication. My colleague Bob Schwartz asked me to bring his greetings. He asked me to give the state a pat on the back for being a leader in the Pathways to Prosperity Project. We started this 3 or 4 years ago, and it wasn't quite clear how it was supposed to work, how us sitting there writing a project was going to lead to change around the nation, but it's been really interesting seeing how it's unfolded. There are 9 states now that are part of the network, and Missouri is one of the leaders in that network, and it's really fascinating to see it evolve and move along. What I want to talk to you about this afternoon is the idea that the work we need to do is social movement work. That I was here when Rick spoke this morning, and he's totally right. There's a lot of the nitty-gritty details of management that there's not a lot of guidance for. Similarly, there's a lot of the nitty-gritty details of teaching that there's not a lot of guidance for. We talk a lot about the general categories, and I'm going to talk some about that stuff this afternoon, but in terms of giving teachers guidance on specific moves in the classroom and why those moves are important, there's not a lot of that. And let me call your attention to a website, John Saphir. How many of you know the name John Saphir? Just a few. John is the guy, when I was going around preparing to do a report on effective high schools in 2009. There's a report on our website, agi.harvard.edu. Go to the bottom of the page, you'll see some reports, and the one on exemplary high schools is one of those. When we were preparing to do that report, several times, or maybe more than several, we'd go around and I said, well, how'd you get this done? Your scores are really low. Now you're among the highest value-added achievement gain schools in the state. How'd you do that? They said, well, John Saphir told us how to do it. Well, John Saphir's organization is called Research for Better Teaching. And his website, if you Google Research for Better Teaching, John Saphir, you'll find his website. And on that website, there are a lot of public access videos where he videotapes teachers in the classroom teaching and explains the moves that they're making and why those moves matter. And he has a number of different categories of teaching moves, so there are a bunch of different tapes on there, and they're open access. You can go and use them, have your teachers watch them, have them organize work around those. So that's not a formal part of my presentation, but it's just a little tidbit that I want to pass on because I think it's really good stuff. I was watching some last night. I think we're going to use some of those in St. Louis and some of the work there. I often start with a poem. I have a collection of poems I've been writing for educators over the last 12 years or so. And I find it's always nice to start with a couple of those. So I'm going to read or recite a couple of these poems and then move on into the rest of the presentation. This first one is from the perspective of a child who comes into a school district and doesn't quite fit at first, but then things work out. It goes as follows. I started kindergarten 2 or 3 big steps behind. Some classmates understood things that had never crossed my mind. The kids who looked real different seemed so smart, I can recall. Those who looked and spoke like I did didn't seem so smart at all. Of course, there were exceptions, but on mostly any day, it was clear those kids were doing best and we were just okay. Our teachers liked them better because they always knew the answers. So kids like me just tried to be good athletes and great dancers. The years went by quite slowly. Most things just stayed the same. Till our principal decided it was time to change the game. She hinted that the reason when those other kids did best was that many knew already more of what was on the test. They learned it from their teachers and from things they did at home, much that I and my companions never had the chance to know. That had always been the pattern. Yes, for years it was the same, but the standards movement came along to finally change the game. Now that there's a new prescription for the way our school is run, everybody's got new goals to reach. It's getting to be fun. We're learning to get smarter. Our teachers show us how. They're all serious about it. Everyone's important now. Time in class is so exciting that we seldom fool around. We might make a joke in passing, but we quickly settle down. After school, we do our homework, often in our study groups. When we need them, we have tutors, and they give us all the scoops. If there's something that's confusing, it's a temporary thing because the teachers love to answer all the questions that we bring. All the counselors and teachers work with parents as a team because they share the same commitment to connect us with our dreams. I love the way things are now. It all just seems so right. We still play sports, and we're still cool. But now we're also bright. That first day of kindergarten, some of us were way behind, but today I'm graduating in a truly different time. Every stanza of that has a different issue in it, and I won't pause to work through those, but one I always like to call attention to is just the "we're learning to get smarter" phrase. Our kids have theories of intelligence, and I think one of the themes in the work we do, even at the district level, needs to be to teach everybody that nobody knows how smart any of us could be, because how smart you are depends upon how hard you work and how long you've worked hard. And whatever it is you work hard at for a long time, you're likely to get smarter at it, including the adults. And so the same way we talk about not wanting to give up on any child and assuming any child can learn, we need to also assume every adult can learn and every one of us can get better. And I heard Rick when he said, there's some people who you don't really want to spend all your time trying to help them get better. You just need to help them find another job. But there's some cut point above which you do want to help people get better. You can debate exactly where that cut point is. And we and they need to have some faith that could actually happen. They could actually get better. The problem with adults, though, is all of us think we know it all already. So, as you know, almost anything you suggest to almost any adult, including me, their answer is going to be, oh, I do that already. And almost anything you tell them, they're going to accept as confirmation of what they already think. So it's not at all unusual after a talk like this to have somebody stop me in the hallway and explain to me how what I said is really confirmation for what they've known for a long time. And then what they say to me is something I didn't even say and probably even disagree with. Okay. And so I just ask you, even as I go through today, just have open at least the plausibility of the proposition that I'm going to say something that's not quite what you already agree with, or that's not exactly what you would have said if you were saying what I'm saying, because most of us have something we can learn, including me. So this notion that it's movement time, I was giving a talk a couple years ago, and I was trying to decide whether to talk about the movement because it was a business group. And before I got up, Bill Shore from GlaxoSmithKline introduced the notion of movements with this quote: "It's a Sputnik moment. Communities are going to rise or fall depending upon whether they have a workforce. We need to have meetings. We need to stop having meetings and have a movement." Okay, so this is the business community all over the country is getting really concerned that they're not going to be able to replace the baby boom generation in the workforce. And that concern is producing summits. It's producing the Pathways to Prosperity conference that we held at Harvard in March was entirely funded by the business community. Okay, yesterday, after I gave a talk at a mini summit we had done in St. Louis, members of the business community came up and were asking how they could help. And it's partly because of their business interests, but it's partly because that has meaning to them too. Business people are regular people too. And they have families, and they live in communities, and they care about how these things turn out. And we have to find ways to give them openings to help us. It's not unusual to have a business person say, well, I'd kind of like to help my local schools, but when I try to reach out, I get the stiff arm. And that's understandable because the schools are busy, they have all kinds of crises you're trying to deal with, you don't have mechanisms to channel all the volunteer help. But we need to find ways to build more of those mechanisms. In relationship, for example, to the Pathways to Prosperity project. I know Bob Schwartz is working mainly from the high school up. My preoccupation includes what he's talking about, but it goes further down. I do more work on education, youth development, even youth development outside of schools, as we'll talk about in a minute. I'd like sometime around the middle elementary years to start introducing kids to various images of possible selves. Okay, imagine being a 10-year-old in 5th grade trying to figure out how do I get from being a 10-year-old in 5th grade to being a 25-year-old with a job? What are all the various pathways I might follow from where I am today? What are the things I need to do in order to keep my options open for those various pathways? What are the jobs that require a 4-year college degree? What are the jobs that don't require a 4-year college degree? What does a day at work feel like? There's a program in Boston called They Made It, So Can I. And they take people in the 5th grade classrooms, and those people tell their life stories beginning when they were in the 5th grade. And the person who runs it, I've never watched it, but she says the people's insecurities from 5th grade come out in their faces and in their voices. And the kids glom on and relate to that, and then they talk about how the challenges they overcame and the choices they made and the quality that their life has now. And as long as we're not sending in people who are whining and complaining that their lives are terrible, the kids learn something useful from that. And you have the whole range from the mail carrier and the truck driver all the way to the brain surgeon. And so even the kids who don't like school, for whom school is really a struggle, see somebody who comes through that said, I hated school all the way through. I never liked it even through 12th grade. But I graduated, and now, I drive a truck for UPS, and I got a good life. I'm in a softball league. We play on Thursdays and Saturdays, and my kids, do this, and I put a life together. So starting to give kids images of how to put a life together, beginning in middle elementary school. The business community can help with that. You can imagine asking the business community to give any employee who wants to visit or volunteer in a school gets 2 hours a month to do that. And I say business, but I really mean employers, the public sector, nonprofit organizations. Those are employers too. They can send folks in to help us. So in this movement, there are roles for everybody. We want to light a fire where everybody is feeling both urgency and a sense of possibility. A sense we've got to get this done, we have to get it done soon, and if we do the work, we'll get the results. And then move ahead with that. One of the sayings that is a handle for me in this, it's a Robert Schuller saying. I don't know how many of you ever watched Robert Schuller on Sunday morning? Okay, he's not on, I think his son took over and it kind of dwindled. But there were a few years, maybe a decade or so, when if you wanted some really good inspirational lines and so on, you tune in to Robert Schuller. One of the ones is this: any fool can count the seeds in an apple, but only God can count the apples in a seed. The apples in a seed are latent, unharvested potential. And the more effectively we cultivate the planted seed, the more apples and the better apples we're going to get out. And so our children have latent, unharvested potential. And this is just a metaphor for helping people have a sense of what it is we're trying to achieve here. One of the challenges of leadership is finding ways to give people a sense of what you're talking about. So just these little metaphors and so on are among the ways all of you as leaders can communicate with audiences to help provide that inspiration. I'm not going to ask you to read this. I'll make the PowerPoint available. This is something you can read after you get a copy of the PowerPoint. It's a vision statement for the movement. And it talks about the purpose, the strategy, the resources, and the rewards. Okay, it's an example of a vision statement again. Now, what's the goal of the movement? Right now, each separate group in the society tends to have a bell-shaped curve of achievement. You take black kids, you'll get a curve that'll look kind of like that. You take white kids, you'll get a curve that looks kind of like the red curve up here. It's further over. They overlap a lot. You get low-achieving white kids, you get a lot of high-achieving black kids, but the averages are different. And also, in public discourse about this is another point that's useful to make. Because sometimes you say there's an achievement gap, and people think all the kids from this group are low and all the kids from that group are high. Making the point that there's huge overlap it seems like obvious common sense, but it's amazing how often people miss that point, and you start having debates that are built around the misperception that there's not much overlap. But the goal is to get everybody up to that green curve. Okay? When I talk about excellence with equity, the goal is group proportional equality with excellence. Group proportional equality means that everybody, all the groups are under the same bell-shaped curve, and each group is equally represented under each part of the bell-shaped curve. So each group represents the same proportion under each part of that curve. And if you get there, then knowing somebody's race or ethnicity tells you zero about their achievement. Okay? Now knowing somebody's race or ethnicity gives you a basis upon which to guess which group or which child is going to have the highest achievement. And on average, you're going to be right. You're going to be wrong some of the time because of the overlap in the distribution. But on average, you're going to get it right. We don't want it to be the case that on average you get it right when you guess difference. We want it to be the case that on average, when you guess difference, you get it wrong because everybody's actually under the same curve. We've got group proportional equality with excellence. Now, just closing achievement gaps doesn't necessarily include the excellence part. You could close the achievement gap by diminishing the achievement of the higher achieving groups. And what we find is that in communities that get really ambitious about closing achievement gaps, that is scary, and a lot of you probably know this already, that's scary to white parents. Because the question is, how are you going to do that? Are you going to just ignore my child? Are you going to kind of slow my child down so that those other people can catch up? Okay, politically, that's suicide sometime. I know of 2 superintendents who lost their jobs because they got very public and vocal about their ambitiousness about closing achievement gaps. Okay, both of them quit before they could be fired, but they knew they were going to be fired, and so they quit. And they're still in superintendencies. They've actually just moved to other places now. But if the message to the community is that we care about all our kids, we're preparing all of our children to compete with the world, not with their classmates. And so we are trying to achieve excellence across the board. Now the comparisons, when we talk about compared to what? For any particular group, test score pattern or something, I think we need to start, for any district, the benchmark should not be any group inside the district. The benchmark should be the statewide average for the high achieving group. So, for example, you're in a particular district and you want to be able to report out you've made progress in closing the achievement gap. The point is not so much that your black kids and your white kids are closer together. The point should be that all of your kids have gone up compared with the statewide average for white kids. If you get your black and Latino and Native American and Pacific Islander and kids up to the statewide average for white kids, as far as I'm concerned, you've closed the racial achievement gap, right? Does that make sense? I noticed when Rick was saying, this is a really quiet room today. And then, because even your white parents can get involved then. If for your white parents the goal is moving their kids up as high as possible compared to an external benchmark, you might say, well, we're a suburban district, our kids are doing really well, our families are very high income, we're already way above the statewide average for our white kids. Well, then choose a different benchmark. Say we want the average for our white kids to get up to the 75th percentile in the statewide distribution. And by the way, we want the average for our black and Hispanic kids to get theirs too. But the first benchmark is getting up to just the 50th percentile, just the mean or the median in the statewide distribution for white kids. When we get there, we can say we've got victory in narrowing and closing the racial achievement gap. Then we got to make even more progress and hit these higher benchmarks. And that just allows you to actually have a movement for excellence, for excellence with equity at the district level that involves all the kids, all the families, that still pays attention to achievement gaps. But it doesn't pit groups in your district against each other. Okay? I haven't seen many people actually done this. People usually agree it's a good idea, but there's some politics to do even to make this transition. Because there's some people who are going to try to hold you to focusing on the district, on the difference within the district. But pushing through that is just part of what leadership is about. Okay. Why is this not, put in the wrong place. I thought I'd just throw up a couple charts. Now, you can't see the details on this, but every line there is a NAEP score, National Assessment of Educational Progress score, for 8th graders in math. And this particular chart is for black kids. And the blue arrow near the bottom, that's Missouri's black kids. So we talk about the progress there is to be made. I got one of these for black kids, one for Hispanic kids, and one for white kids, just to show you where the state is. And so just to get a visceral image of what the work is. So that's where black kids are. This is where Hispanic kids are in the state of Missouri. And we talk about the achievement gap as if the white kids are the norm and they're okay, they're doing fine, it's just those black and Hispanic kids. Well, Missouri's white kids are here in a national distribution for white kids. Okay? So even your white kids are probably not where you'd want them to be. And in fact, most of the South, notice all the red lines are the South. And for white kids in particular, the South is concentrated at the bottom of the national distribution. It's not so true for Hispanic and black kids. For black kids, it looks like that. They're spread all the way through the distribution, which is just a really negative statement about the whole nation with regard to where black kids are. But even there, you see where you are in this state. Oh, this is Hispanic kids. Okay, this was black kids. So they're more spread out. The black kids are more spread out through the national distribution. The Hispanic kids are more spread out through the national distribution. And white kids in the South are concentrated in the bottom of the national distribution. So there's a lot of work to do. But even our white kids nationally are not leading the world, especially in math. I don't know why, oh yeah, one of the next charts, it's this chart, let me just jump to this one. This is from the PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, 15-year-olds, most of you have seen PISA stuff. The data are recently out to be able to do the 2009 chart. I haven't actually put it up yet, but it's pretty much the same story. That red bar, as you come down from the top, the first red bar is white kids in the US. There are 14 other countries that have higher math problem-solving scores by age 15 than white kids in the US. Okay. So when we talk about international competition, our white kids in the US are not leading the world. Our black and Hispanic kids are the two red bars down, or the bottom end, just above Mexico and Turkey. So when we talk about excellence with equity, is taking those two red bars down near Mexico and Turkey, the black and Hispanic kids, move them up fast. And then taking the other two bars up toward the middle, which are Hispanic and white kids, move them up toward the top. and all meeting up at the top of the distribution is the goal. Okay. If the state of Massachusetts was a nation, it would be one of the top 2 or 3 countries. So it's not as if there's nowhere in the US where we're achieving at internationally preeminent levels. I live in Massachusetts. I'm in and out of those schools. They're not that bad, but they're also not that great. Okay, so it's a standard that is fully attainable. We just have to get it done. There are also schools in most states that are really leading the pack, that have stepped out, doing things really well, and achieving substantially more than others are. Does Missouri have value added as part of the numbers that you have available yet? Growth? Okay, so you don't adjust for student background, but you just do the growth piece. Okay, I mean, the growth scores, ideally adjusted for student background if you can get away with it, are what we really need to be focused on. Some of the best schools in the nation are schools where their average achievement is only average, but they're hitting average achievement levels with kids from really disadvantaged backgrounds. So the growth numbers are really high. If you look at any particular time interval, how much those kids have learned from one year to the next can be more than for almost any other school in their respective states, even though the number they hit might only be around the state average. So if we want to identify the exemplary schools from which we want to learn things that we can then share with the other schools, we need to be looking at those that are hitting high growth, even if their average levels are not that high. Okay, when you go into those schools, what you will often find is leaders who are doing stuff that they figured out on their own. What they're doing is typically not stuff that they've learned in any particular program. They each have their own tricks of the trade, and they've built a leadership core around them to get it done. And so I think over the next 5 years in the United States in education, we need to spend a lot more effort getting into those schools that are getting the biggest gains, harvesting that informal folk knowledge that those school leaders have put together, packaging that, and making that a lot of the focus for the way we train principals and assistant principals and on up from that. Again, the stuff that the folks that are getting it done have figured out on their own often. Now, the title back here was, right, why such urgency? This line, this chart here, shows the age distribution. The top red circle that has all those 80s in it, 80, 84, 85, those are the percentages non-white Hispanics among age segments that are over 80 years old as of the 2010 census. So if we go to the 2010 census and we take folks in the United States who are more than 80 years old, more than 80% of them are white. If you go down to the other extreme and see that 52, that's the percentage of children ages 5 years and younger who are white in the United States. Right around that time, we passed the benchmark where the majority of children born in the United States were children of color. So within a decade and a half, we're going to have the majority of children in schools in the whole United States be children of color, from groups that on average are lower performing academically than the white population that's diminishing percentage-wise. And those kids are going to determine the future course of the nation. They're going to be the majority of the workforce. My retirement savings is in a 401k, or a few 401ks, okay? So 20, 30 years from now, the value of the stock market's going to determine my quality of life. And a lot of the business community knows the same is true for them and for their workers. Okay, so unless we can get all kids, all groups of the society up to internationally preeminent levels of achievement, we're at risk of having sort of a middling kind of quality of life as we go forward as a nation. And people kind of are starting to see this. So part of the urgency is because of these demographic changes, it's because of the technology changes and all those things that you've heard a lot about. So I'll push past some of that. This timeline I use as another way to answer the question why it's so urgent to get this done. And I marked off in different colors, different ranges. When I talk to teenagers, I talk about the red zone, which is ages 12 to 18. I'm talking to middle school kids. If you look at how long that red zone is, it's very short in relationship to this lifeline. So that line is your life, right? And the message to the kids is, if you take care of business in the red zone, you can have a lot of freedom in your life. When you get to be 35, 40 years old, you'll be worried about which neighborhood to buy a house in and which brand car to buy and which school to send your kids to. If you don't take care of business in the red zone, you're going to be worried about how to pay the rent and whether you can buy your kids those new clothes that all their friends have to go to school. So getting kids early on to realize that there are actually consequences to whether they do what they need to do academically. We had a meeting yesterday morning when I was telling folks about the fact that we often don't tell students what the consequences are. We tell them you need to get good grades, you need to graduate from high school, but we don't tell them why. And particularly if they aren't planning to go to a highfalutin elite college that requires you to have a really high grade point average in high school, they know that they can go to a community college as long as they graduate. And they know they can graduate with C minuses. But they don't know that if they skate through and graduate with C minuses, they won't pass the AccuPlacer test when they get to community college, and they won't be able to get into regular classes, and they'll never graduate. So we need to help them understand that it's the skills you're going to need. We need to give them images of how those skills get used. And ideally, we need to build that into the curriculum. So in their regular courses, they encounter examples of how it matters that you actually learn what those particular courses are trying to teach you. And that's another place where the business community can help us provide examples of applications and relevance. Because a lot of our teachers don't know how the stuff that they teach is used in real life. They've never had the exposure to figure out how anybody with a job outside of education ever uses the stuff that they're teaching. Okay, whoever uses a Pythagorean theorem, what do they use it for? Okay, most of us in this room probably couldn't answer that. We could imagine a few of those, but we can get some vivid real-life examples. We can get a lot of this stuff on videotape. You can get a few of those done across the state and share those kind of videos across the state. Missouri could be the first state to put together an extensive videographic library of real-life business applications of all the key concepts in K-12 curricula. And then you post it online and the whole country can use it, right? And kids can watch them in the evening. They can be assigned and connected to homework kinds of things, okay? So we have to give kids a sense of purpose. We have to give them a sense of meaning. We have to give them possible selves that become the images that keep them engaged. I worked hard in high school because I knew the kind of difference I wanted to make in the world, and I knew you had to have a good college education to do it, and I knew you had to get good grades to go to college, to get into college. So I took 8th grade off. I did no work in 8th grade. I did no homework in 8th grade. I said, I'm going to have to work really hard from grades 9 through 12, so I'm going to take it easy in 8th grade. Okay? And it's amazing to me that my parents didn't say anything to me about it, because I'd been a straight A student before that, and I did really well in high school. I worked really hard. So some of our kids take 8th grade off, though, just because they don't feel like working. They don't know that they got to start back up in 9th grade and keep going. So we've got to give them this strategic information. On this chart, another image, they actually is two different types of skills. And imagine A, B, and C are 3 different kids. Kid A is really good at skill type 2, not especially good at skill type 1. C is really great at skill type 1, not so good at skill type 2. And B is not very good at either. In fact, he's worse at both than the other 2 are, even the ones who aren't so good at the second skill. So imagine B looking around and trying to figure out what to think of himself, how hopeful to be about his future. Okay? And I thought those questions, do you know any type B students? Have you ever seen one? There are a lot of kids who are below average on everything. And we pay all the attention to the kids who are above average. Right? And especially if you're well behaved and you're below average on everything, it's kind of boring. Okay? I thought about at this point stopping and having people chat at their table about whether you know a type B kid and what did you do with them. But I got so much I want to tell you, I'm going to charge ahead and keep going with it. But that's a useful conversation to have. One of the things I find that's useful with regard to the type B kids is to Imagine there's a point where that green dot is out there. And these are life trajectories, these arrows are. Who's ahead to get to the green dot? Red is not going there, and blue is not going there. And imagine the green dot is something that needs to get done in the world. The idea is that every one of us has our own green dot, our own accomplishment that unless we do it, it won't get done. Okay, it's a stretch, but if we don't give up and we keep working, we can get there, and there's nobody ahead of us. Okay, there's nobody ahead of that green line in getting out to that green dot. And so for those kids who are like B, we have to emphasize to them that there is a green dot out there. There's something in the world that you need to do. We don't know what it is yet. Part of your life's work is to figure out what it is. But whatever it is, there is nobody ahead of you in getting it done. And if you don't do it, it will never get done. And it has value in the world, so we need it to get done. Okay? I came up with that my first year, graduate school in economics at MIT. I went to Cornell University. I did really well. I got A's in graduate level theory courses in economics when I was a senior. But I got to MIT, and it still felt like everybody was ahead of me. Okay? And one of the ways I kind of kept my spirits up was to keep reminding myself that what I was there to do was different from what anybody else is there to do. Okay? And I can guarantee you there's nobody who was in my class. They only admit 30 of us because they say, if we admit you to the PhD program at MIT in economics, we're going to get everybody through. Okay, so there's a small group of us. But I can guarantee you there's nobody else who's standing on a stage doing this right now. This is what I was supposed to get done. Everybody else had what they were supposed to get done, and just kind of go ahead and do it. And we have to help our kids understand that, and we have to support them in that search. Okay. I may read to you a little poem that I wrote a couple nights ago that was inspired by this particular idea. But anyway, if they keep going, then everybody can be successful, is the idea. All right, so this movement notion, this chart just kind of lays out the layers in what we need to think our way through. There's the overarching movement. In the movement, there are goals, and there are lots of them, and people sometimes make the mistake of thinking that they have to agree on those goals before they can make any progress. You're never going to agree across the community about what the goals are. But there are clusters of people who can agree. Okay? So the idea is to encourage people to find some co-conspirators who agree with what they think the goal should be, and then get to work. And the nice thing about the fact that we don't have agreement is that we end up spreading ourselves across all this different stuff that needs to be done. Okay? There's some people who, if you take the ages and stages of life, the 0 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 9, 9 to 14, 14 to 18, 18 to 25, you can find advocates for each of those age ranges that argue that that particular range is absolutely the most important time to be sure we get it right developmentally. Okay? And the fact is there is no throwaway time period. There's developmental work to be done during each age and stage as we go through. And the fact that people disagree about which is most important means they kind of spread themselves across there. There are professionals who work on each of those ages. Then you get people who say, well, no, it's schools where we got to get it done. There are other people who say, no, the family is most important. Other folks say the after-school time stuff, the out-of-school time hours is where they're most of the time. We got to get that right. Then there are folks who say we got to get their spiritual life right, so we got to deal with that piece of it. And so we spread ourselves across all these different pieces. They're all important. There can be goals associated with each of them, and there can be clusters of people inside the movement who ideally will encourage one another to move ahead with it. Okay? And folks in leadership positions, including superintendents, are among the ones that can help people wrap their mind around the fact that something this complicated can still be coherent. Okay? The third line down is strategies. There needs to be a recipe for each goal. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time even thinking about it. Okay, you need a recipe, which is what I mean by strategies here. So you got the movement, you have multiple goals inside the movement, each of which has some constituencies who work on it. Each of those goals has some recipes you kind of figure out. And then note that policies are the fourth line down. Policies provide the resources to do the work to implement the strategies. We often jump first to the policy question without thinking carefully about what the goals and strategies are that the policies are going to help us to support with resources and authorizations. Then the work takes place in the context of programs and projects. And like a school year is like a program. Okay. And then principles and practices are what we want to see inside the programs and projects. So that's where the rubber meets the road. What kids actually experience are activities that have principles and practices embedded. So when you walk into a classroom, there's certain principles and practices that you want to see in place there as a manifestation of what effective teaching and learning looks like. Okay, so almost whatever our goal is, we need to be thinking up and down all these. And there need to be some people in the community whose job it is to do this thinking. A lot of times you go into a community and you can't find who it is that's supposed to do that thinking. You have a lot of people talking around it. They got all the headings there. You say, okay, who do I sit down at the table to go through the detailed, really detailed planning and really think it through? Well, that's nobody's job. Anything that's nobody's job doesn't get done. Also, mostly anything that doesn't get measured also doesn't get done. So the question is, what's the metric that we monitor? How do we go back and go through it? So the basic orientation that I like to have toward getting this work done is to think about the child's lived experience. What are the lived experiences we want our kids to have from birth all the way into adulthood? And then what is it we need to put in place in our community, in our schools, communities, and homes in order to give kids those lived experiences? And then we work our way back up to what the policy questions are. What resources do we need in order to put in place the arrangements that will provide the lived experiences that we think we really want our kids to have? And those first three, going clockwise, parents, teachers, and peers, that's where kids spend most of their time. At home with their parents and their families, in school with their teachers and their friends, and on the playground and after-school settings with their friends. And so we need to take measures to be sure that we get it right in each of those first three circles. And the other two circles, employers and communities, are sources of resources to help us get it right. Okay, so if we're trying to meet with folks in our communities to give them an image of what the movement is that we're trying to enlist them in, this is one way to draw a picture of it. It's these 5 big circles, and I like to put 2 little circles with each of those, so you end up with 10 circles around the outer edge. And what I'm going to do with the rest of my time is just talk you through a little bit of each of those 10 circles, although I'm going to dwell a bit on some of the ones that have to do with teachers. Okay, so that first little red circle says authoritative parenting and learning-focused home life. It's about parenting, what happens at home. It's not about what most people are talking about when they talk about parent engagement. Most people talk about parent engagement, they're talking about the relationship between the parent and the school, or the parent and the health service organization. It's how you reach out and engage parents, come to get them to come to school, to work as a partner with the teacher in various ways. There's other stuff that may be even more important, which is how parents and kids are interacting at home, from birth or even prenatal. Okay, this is a piece we don't like to talk about in public. This is a piece that sounds like it's none of your business what's happening in those kids' homes. Okay, I do a lot of surveying, and I'll show you some of this, what we've learned from students about classrooms in a minute, but we also asked some questions about home. And I remember one community that kind of got upset because we were asking about how much kids read at home and whether somebody reads them with them at bedtime on most evenings. And we had a community meeting to explain why we were asking these things. I remember it was in Michigan, and there were some white parents who came up and said, you got no business asking anything about what goes on in my home. That's my business, not yours. Okay, and then I explained why we were asking, and I promised to come back and show them the results when we had them. And I did come back and show them the results, and we discussed it. And the same father who told me it wasn't my business came up and shook my hand and said, thank you for being here. I see what you're doing now. Okay, but so it's tricky to start talking about how people parent in their homes. But if we're really serious about excellence with equity, we need to affect what goes on at home. Okay, and there is political, we need to have people who are indigenous to the communities we're trying to influence be the main messengers. We from outside their communities can be allies. We can provide them with material to use to go into the community, but nobody wants somebody come into their community and say, y'all's problem is you don't parent right, you just need to parent better. You need somebody from inside the community going to other folks and say, hey, there's some things we could do that we probably haven't been doing as much as we could. We can do better for our kids. Let's get together and talk about it. Let's work on it. Okay? And I find that when you take that approach, when you go in respectfully and you have the right messengers in the mix, people thank you for it. I have a sheet I often hand out that's 18 tips for high achievement parenting. I'll do an evening presentation in a community and I have those tips available. People are so upset sometimes if we run out of sheets. And they come up thanking you for those sheets. So parents want information that they can use as long as you're respectful in the way that you deliver it. The achievement gap actually opens up by age 2. Achievement gaps by parent education levels and achievement gaps by race and ethnicity. Okay, I used to think it was 3, then I said, let me go check, and I went into the data, it was age 2. It's hardly apparent at all at age 1. So that notion of group proportional equality, where all the groups are under the same curve, it looks like that's where our infants start. And then the curve split apart by age 2. And the research has accumulated over the last couple of decades to give us a pretty good idea about what the differences are in early childhood life experiences that lead those curves to split apart. So one of the projects we're trying to push under the label right now, Be Baby Wise, is we want to saturate communities with 5 basic ideas for what parents and caregivers can do with kids in that 0 to 3 age range to stop those curves from splitting apart. Okay? And these are ideas that come out of research. Okay, and I'll tell you what they are. We call them the fundamental 5. And then there's a 2-minute video that I think will take a couple minutes to play that relate to that. The first of the fundamental 5 is maximize love, minimize stress. Stress for infants retards brain development. A baby who's laying wet and hungry for a long time is stressed. A baby who's crying and nobody's paying attention is stressed. A baby around whom people are yelling and arguing or making a lot of loud, sudden noises is stressed. We need to raise attention so if the grandmother or the aunt or the older sibling is in the room and somebody starts yelling, somebody grabs them and says, go do that outside. Don't do that around this baby. Okay, and so by saturating the communities with this kind of information, everybody knows about it, everybody holds everybody else accountable for doing the good stuff and not doing the bad stuff is the idea. So maximize love, minimize stress, and to maximize love is pretty much what you know it is, holding the baby close and various things like that. Second one is talk, sing, and gesture a lot. Talk, sing, and gesture a lot. Really interesting research on gesturing. Okay, it takes babies, I'm not sure exactly how long, maybe a couple months before they can really focus well. As soon as they can focus well, eye contact with the baby when you're communicating with them, pointing. Okay, a lot of people, a lot of the grad students at Harvard are teaching their babies sign language. The researchers who study this stuff say that doesn't really help. That a lot of this stuff is just developmentally inappropriate and doesn't work. It's no more effective than just pointing. Okay, so but pointing helps. Really interesting research by Susan Meadows at University of Chicago and some others. So babies learn to interpret what you're saying as a function of what you're pointing at, and they will start to point before they can start to talk. So it accelerates language development, it accelerates comprehension. Okay, the gesturing. Talking and singing a lot. Babies are encoding sound patterns prenatal. There's a study that shows that European babies cry in the rhythm of their mother's native language. The newborns are soothed more by singing in their mother's native language than others. Okay, and so it's real talk, not baby talk, from the very beginning, because kids are learning those sound patterns. And they will speak sooner, they will have comprehension sooner, their brain development will be accelerated. It's real talk, not baby talk, gesturing, eye contact during communication. Okay, that's not something that any parent can do these things. But most of us didn't do it with our own kids. Particularly the gesturing piece, we might have done it accidentally, but we didn't know that that was actually something you could do in a more purposeful way. Okay, so third one is using number games to lay the foundation for numeracy. We talk a lot about literacy, but not as much about numeracy. There are intuitions for doing mathematics that have to do with ordinality and sequence and magnitude. We can develop that intuition really early, and part of our brain that manages that stuff then becomes better, bigger, more developed. Okay, we're trying to put together now a whole sequence of age and stage appropriate math games that we can just hand over to parents that don't cost hardly anything. You say, here, just do this with your kid. The fourth is encourage and enable spatial exploration. Spatial exploration is moving around in space, in three-dimensional spaces, for example, allowing a 15-month-old to crawl around in a crowded room, where he's got to maneuver his way around things, where he has to crawl to the other side of a piece of furniture that he can't see around, and where in his mind's eye he's envisioning and anticipating what's on the other side of the furniture. Okay. Helping infants to develop that mind's eye. That's going to be important for handwriting, because the visual motor integration matters for handwriting. And when you're writing, you're actually anticipating where your hand's going to go next. Okay. It's useful for athletics. Think about somebody running hurdles and that integration that you need. And for geometry, so again, encouraging and enable spatial exploration. And then finally, number 5 is read a lot and use books with your child, but don't just read. As soon as they get to the point where they can respond, have a conversation, interact about the book, and have a combination of lower order and higher order reasoning. So they're the descriptive things that help a kid feel smart because he knows what that is. Oh, that's a horse. But then there's explain, what's the 3 ways? It's remember, explain, and anticipate. Remember, explain, and anticipate. That requires some thought. It requires the kid to actually use a little brain muscle to remember, explain, and anticipate. So questions like, if you were going to finish writing the story, how would you tell it? Or why do you think this person did this in the story? Or what do you think is going to happen next when we turn the page? Or what do you think would have happened if instead of blue, the dog had been brown? Okay. And so there are just lots of ways. Once the parent starts thinking, most folks can manage this. But those fundamental 5 are things that a lot of folks don't have access to. People who have more education are more likely to approximate it. Probably even the people with more education have not been doing it as much as they could, even though when you tell them about it, they'll tell you, oh yeah, we do that. And I have had the experience of mentioning these to people, and they say, oh yeah, we've done that. It's been so useful to do those things with our kids. And I just hesitated to say, tell me in more detail about how you did each of those things. Okay, because I'm pretty confident that they did not do each of those things. But most folks want to think of themselves as having been good parents, and so they're going to just convince themselves that you've not told them anything new, that they can go and do each of those things. And so we have to persuade people to pay more attention. Because as, again, about adults, most of us is we kind of, yeah, and we're kind of doing it, and kind of doing it is good enough. Well, with each of those, kind of doing it may not be quite good enough. My friend in the back, can you play that video now? It's a little too bad. One of the New York City advertising firms did this
To
with us.
nourish, to protect, and to prepare. The basic responsibilities of every parent. Responsibilities that fuel our innate obsession to ensure that our children have the very best. Better, we hope, than we had it ourselves. It's what being a parent is all about.
Nourishing and protecting require little explanation. But when do you start preparing your child for a life to come? Studies have shown that children of different backgrounds arrive at preschool with vastly different abilities to learn, which tells us preparation starts the moment they are born.
That's why Seeding for Success was created, a not-for-profit foundation formed by some of the country's leading educational minds, and dedicated to the notion that every moment, starting from day one, is vital to every child's future. It's all about getting the proper start by giving every child aged 0 to 3 the same opportunity to explore their unlimited learning potential, regardless of ethnic, socioeconomic, or any other perceived differences.
The program is based on decades of research, which have shown that it's those first 3 years that can have the greatest impact on a child's success in learning and in life.
The Seeding for Success program consists of 5 guiding principles. We call them the Fundamental 5. Fun, simple, everyday things that every parent can do so that every child has an equal shot to be exceptional.
1. Maximize love while minimizing stress.
2. Talk, sing, and gesture often.
3. Use number games.
4. Encourage spatial exploration.
And 5. Read stories and discuss them when done.
We hope that you'll join us in helping America's children be the best, most prepared that they can possibly be.
I should just say quickly, that video can't be shared more widely. That was just using some file footage they had at the advertising company, and they would have to get a bunch more permission. So if we post this video of the presentation any place, I hope we can snip out that piece of it. Otherwise, I may be in jail someplace. All right. So can we put the PowerPoint back up? Good. So the achievement gap, as I said, is apparent by age 2. Most of you as educators know that it's there the first day of kindergarten. You may not have known it was there 3 years earlier, before the first day of kindergarten. So it's not necessarily the school system's job to get it done, but as civic leaders, it's your job to get it done or to try to find allies who can help to work with this. We're actually still in the process of raising resources to create the kit that communities can use to do this saturation approach that we're talking about. So let me move ahead. I won't say much at all about school engagement, parent engagement. My colleague Karen Mapp at the Graduate School of Education, Harvard, does a lot of work with communities around this. There are a lot of good ideas about how to do that most places don't use yet, but that can be used and aren't that complicated to use. Then we get with the teaching piece. So we have kids with their families and all the family stuff. Then we have what goes on in schools. And here, it's not unusual to have one teacher who's producing 2/3 of a year worth of progress and another teacher next door, same kind of kids, who's producing almost 2 years a year worth of progress. There's huge variation in value and gains, in achievement gains, within most schools across classrooms. The unit of analysis needs to be the classroom. There's much more variation within schools than there is across schools. We talk about strong schools and weak schools. I'll show you some images after a while, just showing you how much more variation there is within schools than between schools. So we need to get schools working as organizations where everybody's learning from each other, and then even across schools in districts where everybody gets a chance to learn from the folks that are really getting it done. Circle 3 is methods and routines for observing and refining teaching, and 4 is methods and routines for team-based review of student work, student performance and work. And we could debate exactly what should go in those circles. But it's various kinds of things to help teachers get better at their work. We have a protocol called Teaching the Hard Stuff that is the basis of an hour-long conversation where teachers take turns over time bringing what we call the item of hard stuff. The item of hard stuff is an assignment on which students did not do as well as the teacher had hoped. And the teacher brings in examples of student work ranging from the ones that got it right all the way to several that didn't get it right. And they sit there with their colleagues and they think together about why is it that our students didn't do as well on this assignment as we had hoped they would have. And there's about 15 minutes where the teacher who's bringing the item introduces it to their peers. Then there's about half an hour when they talk about whether success was feasible. And under that heading, they look diagnostically and prescriptively at 5 things. At what skills would the student have needed to do well, what vocabulary would they have needed to understand, what concepts would they have needed to understand, what strategies would they have needed to have, and is there a possibility they just panicked and had anxiety and just couldn't think. So what skills would the student have needed to do well on this assignment, and do we see any evidence of those skills when we look at their work? If we don't see evidence of those skills, what are the implications for teaching? If we do see evidence of the skills, what are the implications? What vocabulary? Some vocabulary words have 2 or 3 different meanings, and kids are choosing the wrong meaning and getting confused. Or they're words that they just don't understand that are in the assignment, and that's why they couldn't do it. So is there a possibility that was the issue? Then concepts. And the distinction between concepts and skills is a distinction between being able to just do long division problem, which is kind of a skill, versus understanding what the remainder means. Okay, being able to interpret what that remainder means. That's a concept. You have to understand that. And so then strategies, looking at the work, Well, does it look like they had an approach? Did they have a strategy? And then finally, anxiety. And then the last 15 or 20 minutes are about whether there was something social going on in the room that might have been a distraction. Okay, or was the work just boring, or did it seem not important? Or was the teacher-student dynamic kind of strange? Just some of those kinds of things. But when teachers sit down with that rubric and use it, when I've watched them, they always get up from the table understanding their kids a little bit differently from when they sat down. Every school I've ever worked with it said, yeah, it's a good idea, we need to build that into our routines. Not a single school has ever built it into their routines. Okay. I pretty much stopped working with schools about 5 or 6 years ago because it got so frustrating that there was never any follow-through. I'm starting to do it again now. Hope not to be as frustrated. All right. But they would do it. The times I would visit, visit 2 or 3 times, they pull some people together to do it, and they say, yeah, we need to build it in. Check back 5 or 6 months later, oh yeah, we kind of stopped doing that. They didn't decide to stop doing it. It's just that there were so many other things going on, it kind of just didn't get in there. So the idea of having formal schedules where things are prioritized and you make sure they happen is important. So the question is, if we think that teaching really is important and we need to monitor the quality of it, how do we know the quality of it? How do we judge the teaching that we see? A lot of what we do now is through observations, through supervisors, through peers, through coaches, going in and watching people and using protocols. Often I think Charlotte Danielson's is probably the most frequently used. But as a lot of you may know, I created about 10 years ago out of work in Shaker Heights the Tripod Project surveys that ask the kids what the teaching is like. And part of what we've learned from the Gates Foundation project on measuring effective teaching, that the kids are the most accurate observers. If you're trying to take in one class and take what you pull up, take the information from one class and predict what you're likely to get on the same dimensions from a different class, what the kids tell you is the best predictor. On the screen here I have, let's say you have value-added achievement gains. You have Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching, and you have the Tripod 7 C's that we talk about. The correlation between classrooms is 0.38 for value-added in the Gates data. It's 0.42 for the frameworks for teaching. It's 0.61 for Tripod 7 C's. This is for middle school math. Well, actually, no, this number is math and ELA combined, grades 4 through 8 is where these numbers are calculated from. Okay? But the kids are in there every day with the teacher all year. And it's not just one of them. There are 10 or 15 or 20 of them. And so even if a few get it wrong, it kind of averages out with the others. There's just a lot more information embedded in what the kids tell you than in what any number of adults could pick up sitting there day after day. And there's some things that the adults just can't see. And I'll come back around to some of those. So I'm going to show you some about the kinds of things we can learn here, just ways. These student perspectives can help teachers to improve because teachers can get their own classroom reports, look through, understand what the kids are perceiving. At Harvard, we get evaluated every semester by our students. And it's not publicly in line, but it's anybody who's a student or another faculty member can look to see how you did. And you can look to see how you did yourself. And there's virtually always something that I see that I had not been focused on. It's like you see one thing one semester, you say, I better focus on that. So then that gets better. Then there's something else you hadn't focused on that slips a little bit or you need to work on. So there's always something to learn from an audience, in this case from the kids, about something you could have done differently if you just take the time to pay attention to it. So teachers, leaders, coaches, and mentors, higher education institutions, we're starting to do some thinking about tracking student teachers with some of these same kinds of ideas. Can benefit from what the kids can tell us. The basic framework, the tripod, is content, pedagogy, and relationships. It's that triangle at the bottom. Teachers need content knowledge, they need pedagogic skills to communicate the material, and they need to be able to connect with kids through relationships. But those three notions by themselves aren't quite rich enough, so we unbundle those into what we call the 7 C's. And the 7 C's predict student engagement. And we tend to measure both the 7 C's and student engagement in our surveys, and those together predict student outcomes. 7 C's are the things on the screen here. And they're in the two groups, support and press. In any hierarchical relationship, there are some elements of the relationship that are very supportive, that are frequently welcomed by the people who are the beneficiaries, and there are other elements that can make people uncomfortable. We call those press. They don't always make them uncomfortable, but they can be a little stressful. Okay? And so those here we call challenge and control. Under challenge, we talk about challenge for effort, perseverance, and rigor. So we want you to work hard, stick with it in the face of difficulty, and think hard. Don't just try to memorize things, try to understand it. I mean, I'm sure with your own kids, I've had with my own kids, just tell me the formula, just tell me how to do it. No, I'm going to explain to you how to do it and why you do it this way. I don't need to know that. My teacher didn't say I need to know that. Well, your teacher should have said you need to know that. Okay? We need to understand the rationale, the more rigorous reasons. And then control is about staying focused on tasks, being respectful, staying busy. Our class stays busy, doesn't waste time, is a control item. But my classmates behave the way my teacher wants them to is also a control item. Okay, so I want to do a little thing here. We've got 7 C's up there. And the question is, which one of those would you guess is the strongest predictor of how much kids learn from one year to the next? And why don't I give you a minute to talk to other people at your table about which one of those 7 C's, I hope you can see them, is caring. And by the way, caring here is really emotional support. There's a sense of caring that kind of takes it all in. It's just a teacher, it matters so much, they just work hard on everything. But here, it's more emotional support is what we mean by caring here. Then captivating is making things interesting and relevant. Conferring is interacting, inviting students' ideas, inviting feedback, respecting students' points of view. Clarifying is teaching in ways that at the end of it all they understand it. It's having multiple ways to explain things, multiple good ways. Consolidating is checking for understanding. It's summarizing. It's relating things forward and backward. And so of these 7 C's, which do you think is the most important? Let me take 30 seconds or 45 seconds to discuss it and see if you can reach a consensus at your table about which of the 7 C's is going to be the strongest predictor. And if you already know, don't tell anybody. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. You don't have to agree with your table, but I'm going to ask for a show of hands. You can only vote for one. Okay, you ready? I'm just going to go down the list. And again, let's say show of hands. Okay, care. Looks about 70 or 80% of the people in the room. Captivate. Shouldn't be many people left. Looks like we almost. Okay, confer. All right. Clarify. 1, 2, 3. How many people in here? 400 maybe? 3 out of 400. Okay. Consolidate. That's about 6 or 7. Challenge. Okay, we got a little plurality. Maybe 10%, maybe, probably less than 10. Control. Anybody hands up? Is anybody's hand up for control? Everybody got it wrong. Control is the strongest predictor. Oh, she had her hand up? Okay, let's see. You wanted to put your hand up. A class that is busy, well-behaved, on task, that's the strongest predictor of value-added achievement gains. And it's the strongest predictor by a non-trivial margin. I just finished a paper that combines the Tripod 7 Cs framework with Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching using the data that came out of the MET project. And even in Charlotte's framework, managing student behavior is the strongest predictor of value-added gains. Now, we don't want that answer. In fact, Charlotte, when she looked at the paper, she said, I'm so disappointed that that's the answer. Okay. But the vote here is not unusual in an audience like this to get 80% of people voting for CARE like we did here, pretty much there. CARE is the weakest predictor. But it's what we've learned. I mean, there's no way you would know if we didn't do these kinds of studies. Okay? Remember, and then the second strongest predictor is challenge. And there was a cluster of people here that voted for challenge. Challenge and control are the press measures. They're the academic press. They're the ones that get people to do what they don't really want to do sometimes. Sit still and I know you want to move around the class, but stay focused and stay on task. Our class stays busy and doesn't waste time. Okay, students behave the way my teacher wants them to. We don't get really high levels of agreement with these items on the surveys. And the places where we do get high levels of agreement, it ends up, they got 3 months more on task time per year. Imagine a class that's really that's not very much on task, and a class that is, add that up across 9 months, that's a lot more time on task in those classes. And then with challenge, you've got classes where the kids get to the place, I can't understand that. And the teacher says, you don't understand it yet, but you will, and we're not going to stop until you do, right? And you're challenging kids to persist in the face of difficulty. And the rigor, we're challenging them to actually understand it and not just try to memorize it, and to think their way through things, right? So those two are the strongest predictors. The second strongest predictor, the third strongest predictor that I think there were 3 hands for, is clarify. But those 3 together, control, challenge, and clarify. After that, the other 4 add almost nothing to predicting value added. Control, challenge, and clarify. You've got a classroom where the kids stay on task and focused, where the teacher gets them to push through the difficulty and not give up, to really try to understand it, and if they get confused, the teacher can clarify. It's not the most fun class in the room, in the building. Okay? It's not necessarily a class when you go and you say, oh, this is just, I'd love to be in this environment. It's not always that interesting. The teacher does not warm, touchy-feely, and cuddly all the time. But it's a class where the most learning happens. Now, what I've been talking about here is what predicts learning, and really short-term learning, maximizing test score growth over the period of a school year. But what if we were interested in producing long-term love of learning? These 3 might not be the ones you would focus on most. Captivate might be. You'd want kids to think things are just so interesting that they start looking for stuff to read just to be fascinated the same way again. Care might now come in if we talk about trying to get kids to really gravitate to some lifelong love of learning because they have that sense of feeling loved being associated with the process of learning. And it turns out we also have, in our engagement measures, we measure a lot of stuff other than just value added. So if you're predicting the response to the item, my teacher in this class makes me more interested in going to college, guess what? Clarify, challenge, and control predict almost nothing. The things that predict what the value added are different from the things that predict kids' inspiration to want to go to college. The strongest predictors of inspiration to want to go to college are care and captivate, and to some degree confer. We've got a teacher who's making this a really interesting and enjoyable place to be, and a warm, accepting kind of place to be. And also, the same thing to the strongest predictor of happiness. This class is a happy place to be. So happy, inspired classrooms are care and captivate and confer. Okay. Effort, self-perception of effort. I pushed myself hard to understand my lessons in this class. I've tried really hard to do my best work all year in this class. those are equally predicted by the support and press measures, pretty much equally. So it's both support measures and the press measures are predicting effort. So it turns out we care about lots of different things as outcomes. We want those short-term test score gains, but we also want the evolution of a more and more pro-learning disposition, a love of learning over time. So we need to pay attention to all these things. Okay. If we get too focused on test score gains, okay, it's just like you put the pedal to metal and stress everybody out as much as you can for 5 months. They'll do better on the test, but they'll want to get out of there and never come back, right? And so it's a matter of getting that balance. And the discourse, the public discourse on these, I don't want to back off of test scores too much, because the skills that test scores measure are skills that employers pay for. Okay, test scores are very good predictors of earnings. In fact, they produce a lot of the racial difference in earnings, differences in test scores do. So I don't want to back off the test scores too much, but we want to be sure that we've also got the other piece in there that provides the inspiration and pulls kids in to really want to be there in the classes. And our best teachers score high on all these things. When I talked about those videos that are on John Saphir's site showing teachers with various teaching moves, those teachers are going to rate high on almost all this stuff. But it's the variation among teachers that we can learn from on this, okay? Now, after everything I said, sometimes I'll give a talk like this and somebody come up to me in the hallway and she said, I've always known that caring and personalization was really the most important thing we do, and you confirmed it. Thank you so much. And I said, did I really say that care and personalization was the most important thing we do? Okay, so I'm saying this now just in case somebody's thinking that. That's not what I said. Okay. What I said is all the 7 C's matter, and they matter differently for different things. And if you want to maximize test score growth, help your teachers learn to clarify what they're teaching, give them methods to push kids when kids want to give up and not try any harder, and give them methods to keep their class orderly. Now, one of the things that I'm still trying to work through now in the research is figure out the degree to which the support C's actually predict the press C's. It could be that clarify, care, confer help you to get the class under control. And it's not that they don't matter, but they matter through their impact on control and challenge. Okay, if you're doing those things and you don't get the class under control and you don't achieve challenge, then you don't get the test score gains. Okay, and some people think, well, in order to get your class under control, you've got to be a drill sergeant. You just got to be a hard-nosed, strict, mean teacher. And you can intimidate and coerce your children into being under control. Okay, you can probably do that. You can probably get some pretty good test score gains from doing that. But that's probably not the way you want to do it. You probably want to get them under control by teaching so well that they forget to get off task. They just stay focused because it's interesting, and you're able to clear up their confusion, and you're inviting them to interact with you. That's the confer piece. And they know that you love them, so they don't want to let you down. They want to pay you back for the love that you express as a teacher. Okay, you can get control that way too. And so one of the subtleties, I'm still trying to figure out how do we get this, how do we tease this out of the patterns in the data to be able to show well that it's the support things that for the best classrooms that help us to produce the control and the challenge. And I have some patterns that look like that's an interpretation of these patterns is that that's what's going on. And I think that's my preferred interpretation. Okay, just these 6 statements are the most correlated in the MET data with value-added gains. Number 1, students in the class treat the teacher with respect. Now that's kind of strange. That's not even communicating material. But you can think about what gets the kids to treat the teacher with respect. It's probably a lot of things that the teacher is doing. Second, my classmates behave the way my teacher wants them to. And third, our class stays busy and doesn't waste time. Those in that order are the 3 strongest predictors of achievement gains in the MET data. The 4th strongest predictor is in this class we learn a lot every day, and in this class we learn to correct our mistakes. And again, those sort of hidden behind that are items that have more actionable language in them. And then finally, my teacher explains difficult things clearly is the 6th strongest predictor. And some of the other items on these explain more vividly than these do even what the teacher's actually doing to produce these. How much difference does it make? That 4.8 months there, if you rank order, if you take all the teachers who were in the MET project, and it's about almost 3,000 classrooms, often a couple of classrooms per teacher, but almost 3,000 classrooms. You rank order them by how their kids rated them. From the classrooms that rated high on highest on a composite measure of the 7 C's at one end, all the way down to the classrooms that rated lowest on a composite measure of the 7 C's at the other end. Just imagine all those teachers standing up in a long line from the highest scores at the front of the line to the lowest scores at the back of the line. If we go up 25% of the way to the line, we're at the 25th percentile. Go another 50% through the line, we're up at the 75th percentile. We could take off those teachers who are at the 25th and the 75th percentile and look at their value-added achievement gains, see how much their kids learned. In mathematics, using the state standardized test for these 5 or 6 different districts, the difference is half a year, 4.8 months difference in math learning per year. Predicted based on what the kid said at the 25th versus the 75th percentile. Imagine going out to the 10th percentile versus the 90th percentile. You're getting more toward a year's worth of difference in learning in the context of a year across classes. Okay. The 3.7 months was from the balanced assessment. That was not an accountability test. That's just another standardized test that's viewed as being a bit more rigorous than most of the standardized accountability tests. And there was 3.7 months difference from those 2 points in the line. So that's almost 4 months. And then the 2.3 and the 2.9 are from the language arts, from the English language tests. So between 2 and 3 months a year difference in English language arts, 4 to 5 months a year difference in math, comparing the 50th and comparing the 25th and the 75th percentile, based on what the kid said. Okay, so these are big differences in learning that we're talking about. How much do classrooms differ? I know this is probably a little small for you to see, but the green, the kind of rank ordering that I just talked about, if you took our national sample of all the places that we've surveyed across the country, dump it all together, rank order all the teachers for the whole thing, and then ask about the percentage agreement at the 90th percentile. And agreement means on a scale of 1 to 5, the 4s and the 5s, the ones that said mostly true or totally true. High school level, 85% agreement at the 90th percentile. 27% agreement at the 10th percentile. So that's the 90-10 split. In middle schools, you see it's 81 to 34. Upper elementary, 79 to 55. Lower elementary, 91 to 53. Even the little kids, I'll show you a little bit, even the K1-2 kids can answer very simple questions about what life in their classroom is like. We haven't had a chance yet to do the value-added thing with that, but there's one of the districts where we just surveyed everybody. They do, this Northwestern Education Association has some formative assessment stuff they do, even for the kindergartners. And so we're going to be able to take that and look at the classroom differences and see the degree to which what the kids said predicts those classroom-to-classroom differences. But they're very systematic patterns. So academic press, the press measures are at the top half of the page. The support measures, the bottom half of the page. The patterns are pretty much the same across both. The basic point is that there are big differences between classrooms, no matter how we measure them, but especially with measuring based on what the kids tell us there. All the dots on this diagram, each one, those are 4 different schools. The average favorability or agreement in school A is 52.6. In school D, it's 46.0 for a difference of 6.2 or 6.6. But look at the dots. In the lowest one, it's under 10 in school C, less than 10-point favorability. That's like 2 kids out of 30 or something. And in the highest schools, school D, the lowest rated school has the highest rated classroom, which is about 85% favorability. But if you're looking for differences in need levels, in need for support, and you're looking at school averages, you're going to miss the whole story. You say, oh, well, school A is the school that's doing the best here. School D isn't doing so well. That's almost irrelevant. when you look at the variation across classrooms here. We need to find the classrooms where the teachers are struggling. We need to harvest from the classrooms where the teachers are hitting home runs at the top of that, some ideas that we can share with and work with the teachers who are struggling on. For K2, if you take, this is about 3,300, almost 3,400 classrooms that each have between 10 and 35 kids, and these are kindergarten, first and second grade. And you graph the percentage of kids who say yes instead of maybe or no to about 17 survey items. It looks like this. So at the bottom end, you see 30%, around 30 is about the lowest we get. And then it goes up really rapidly to around 60, then it levels off, and it goes all the way up to 100 at the other end. And that's just the average. But we can take, just to show you how systematic even the little kids are, imagine just taking out of each classroom just the girls or just the boys and asking at their agreement level. And so if we do that and we graph over this, the red line is the whole class. The blue stuff here is just the boys. It tends to be really close around the red line. And if you think about for each kid, the percentage of all the items that they said yes to, the variation reflected by that blue line reflects only about 1.5 kids, 1.5 items worth of difference between the girls and the boys on average from classrooms. Okay, any individual classroom that was real different would have their own little blue spike that would go way off the line, and there are a few that go way off the line, but not very many. The girls looks like that if we layer it over that. That's the girls and the boys. So even the little kids. And then if you break it apart, kindergarten, first and second grade, it's pretty much the same picture on that, right? If you take those little, under kindergarten there, I put some blue circles in there. The circles, some ones in the high and some ones in the low. You see there's very little overlap between the points, the levels inside those two circles. So we're able to make some pretty strong distinctions, and this is just mostly on one deployment per classroom. So if you deploy multiple times per classroom, you're actually averaging out those random errors, and it gets even tighter for understanding teachers. And then you get with the teachers, and they reflect on what their kids are telling them. There was a write-up on this work in the October Atlantic Monthly, I believe it was, and they followed kids around, and they went in classrooms where they were actually doing the survey. And there was one little boy, they told his story where he was so excited he would announce his answers as he was going through. But then the teacher looked at the results, and they had some of the narration from what the teacher said when she saw the results. She said, "Oh, they rated me highest on caring." She said, that's good, because I thought that too, but I didn't know they knew. They thought that. Then she said, "But look, only half of them agree that the class stays busy and doesn't waste time." She said, "Now that's really useful." You know, that only half of my kids would agree that we stay busy and don't waste time. Okay, as you go through. So do they predict student engagement? And here, I won't linger here very much, but if you think about grit, everybody's talking about grit these days. We want these dispositions where our kids stick with stuff and don't give up. So this is just 3 items. Sometimes I pretend to be working hard for this class when I'm really not. In this class, I take it easy and do not try very hard to do my best. And in this class, I stop trying when the work gets hard. Okay, so those are kind of the opposite of grit. And so do the 7 C's predict those? And we do an analysis without trying to understand all this. What you see is 3 in circles, the captivate, challenge, and clarify. Those are the 3 that are the strongest predictors of grit, both in the particular district I did this for and also in the national data. The red and the blue, the red lines and the blue bars are pretty much telling the same story. So, and that combination, captivate, challenge, and clarify, is different from the combination that predicts happiness, is different from the combination that predicts value-added gains. So again, it depends upon exactly what you're looking at. And you can imagine why that would predict grit, because you don't want the kids to give up, you want them to persist. Well, captivate is they're finding it interesting. That gives them a reason to persist. Challenge is the teacher's pushing them and not kind of letting them slack off. And clarify is they actually understand it. And so it's easier to stick with it when the teacher's teaching in a way that you actually understand it. And this is just some lines that throw a bunch of stuff in. The 1 to 10 is deciles of teaching quality from the bottom decile to the top. The lines each represent one of those engagement measures: efficacy, happiness, effort, mastery, grit, help-seeking, punctuality, good behavior. Bottom line is they're all sloping up. Kids are more engaged in classrooms, they rate higher on the 7 C's. And the red line is the most steeply sloped. It goes the highest and also goes the lowest. That's measuring happiness in class. Okay. So, and these are all measured in standard deviation units, so they're kind of standardized. So you could say that the quality of teaching has the biggest impact on happiness of all those other engagement measures. And most of us care about whether our kids are happy in class, right? Even if there's a point at which making your kids happy is probably going to reduce their standardized achievement gains. And so at the edge, I'd be willing to trade a few test score points for some extra happiness, but not too much. You got to balance it out, right? Okay, profiles. You can take this kind of stuff and drill down from the district to the kid. You can aggregate it all the way up and have one number that is a summary number on the 7 Cs for an entire district. And you can compare districts, or you can compare a given district over time, or you can drill all the way down to one classroom, or the girls or the boys in one classroom. We always promise every student total confidentiality. So we'd never drill down to a kid and then talk about them as an individual. But you can imagine taking the kid identifiers off and using individual kids as case studies. You know, there are lots of interesting questions asked, like help seeking. Which kids say that they would never ask the teacher for help? And how do they answer all those other questions in a way that helps us to extract a story about why this child would never ask a teacher for help? And then that story helps us reflect more on what we need to do to help the child get into a mindset where they would be more willing to ask the teacher for help. By the way, the strongest predictor of help avoidance, this is the child saying that I know I need help, but I just don't like asking for it. The strongest predictor of that is how much teasing there is in the classroom. The more teasing there is in the classroom, the more kids avoid seeking help. And it turns out if you flip that and you say, well, what is it that predicts when kid says, if I have a problem in this class, I would ask the teacher for help? That's help seeking. Help seeking turns out is not the exact opposite of help avoidance. Clarify is among the strongest predictors of help seeking. If the teacher can't explain it clearly, then you learn that after time and you think, I'm wasting my time to ask a question. But if you know a teacher can explain things really clearly, you're going to have more kids reaching out to seek help when they need it. So if you want less help avoidance and more help seeking, you got to affect the peer culture in a way that's going to cut down on teasing. And you got to be sure that the teacher has good, clear, effective explanations. And those two things together will get less of help avoidance, more help seeking, and ultimately better achievement because you end up with more comprehension because the kids kept asking questions until they were able to understand what was going on. Every line in this chart is a school. This is an urban district that has 48 schools in it. It's color-coded. You'll see there's variation across the schools. But again, like I said before, most of the variation is within school. So dark red means you got less than 25% favorability. There's no school on here for any of the C's. Across the top, you see care, control, challenge, clarify, captivate, confer, consolidate. So you got all the C's across the top. There's no dark red. There's no school that had less than 25% favorability. There are a bunch of in the pink. Pink is step 25 to 39% favorability. There's also, there's a little bit of dark green above 75% on challenge. There are 4 schools that have dark green in the challenge range, but mostly they're in the middle colors. But we can decide to go into the lowest rated school. Now you got a lot of red. See, you have one classroom that is under 25% favorability for all the 7 Cs. You have about 5 or 6 that are in the pink or the red. Actually, it looks like, 6 that are in the pink or the red for all of them. You still don't have any that are entirely in the dark green. If you say, what's the goal? Should we ever be satisfied if fewer than 75% of the kids rate their classes favorably on each of these dimensions? At least 3 out of 4 say, yeah, it's at least mostly true. Okay, it's hard to be satisfied with less than 75%. Not one class in this building has 75% for all 7 of the C's. Then we go into the highest rated school, it looks like that. Not very much dark red. Still a fair amount of pink. This class at the very bottom almost makes it to all 75%, but there's 70% in confer. Everything else there in 75 or above. So even in our highest rated school, in a district where we had, what was that, 43? Let me see up there, 48. 48 secondary schools. Even the highest rated school does not have a lot of dark green in it. And it's got some red and a fair amount of pink in it. Okay, and this is typical. This is not unusual. It would be very surprising if any place we could survey in this state would have profiles that would look much different from this. Okay, so there's a lot we can do to bring those bottom classrooms up. And if we got a lot of people who are stuck at those bottom rungs, just like Rick Hess was talking about earlier today, after a couple of years, if they aren't moving the ball on that, maybe there's some other profession that would suit them better. Okay, and just counsel them out. One of my colleagues said that it gets to the point where he said, you know, you don't have to go home, but you and I both know you need to leave here. Okay, and at some point that conversation needs to happen. Imagine these two classrooms, and I'm going to stop in a second. There's classrooms A and B, and on each of the C's, they're rated either low, moderate, or high. And then we have some of the engagement measures at the bottom. We show what column the class is in for each of these metrics. And let's imagine that somebody, an adult observer, goes in to observe the classroom. Which one of these classrooms is the adult observer going to have the best impression of, to maybe give the highest overall composite rating to after they leave? So they go in there, they sit a half an hour, 45 minutes, they watch, they go back to their office, and they're thinking, that was a good class, or not. Which one are they feeling the best about? I want to ask you to take a couple minutes, talk to the people at your table about whether you think Class A or Class B is the one that the observer is going to find most impressive. Is that clear what I'm asking? All right, can you start now? Or just, actually, look at it for about 30 seconds before you start talking. It's probably a good idea. All right. Okay, I've got one table over here where they're disagreeing. Can I get you to say what you're thinking? Yeah, here.
Well, if I understand your question, I think that as an observer, we often look at how a student is, if they're seeking help in the classroom, which would be in classroom B, and that teacher's responding and clarifying, but that may not be the classroom that's having the highest success.
No, I didn't ask about which classroom is having the highest success. I asked which one is the observer likely to come away with the better impression of. Okay, so you think it's B because the kids are asking for help and so on. Okay, and you had a different point of view.
I'm going back to the care part. And as an observer, being an educator teacher, you're looking for a classroom where I guess things seem maybe a little mild, where things aren't out of control. So looking for the care part.
Look, wait a minute, you said B, right? So B was high on help seeking, but B is also high on care. You said care. So B is the one that's high on care. A is one that's low on care, right? You're looking at seeking and clarification. So you're looking to clarify. Okay. Anybody else got a point of view on this that I can get you to speak into the mic about? Guy in the white shirt there, can I get you to say something? You're going to go with B. Okay. Anybody want to argue for A? It's not a risk.
If you look at control being the highest predictor, B is the lowest there. So I think people would think A, if they walked into the classroom, they would think A is getting the highest rating.
Okay, they walk into the classroom, they would think A is getting the highest rating because
control is high.
Because control is high. Okay, let me take that one. It's not quite as loud as this one. Okay. One more person. Maybe anybody else wants to express a point of view? Okay. Oh, yeah, you can help you out. Never mind, closer.
I think that observer would come away with A because of the control of the classroom.
Okay. Now the question is, what can the observer actually see? Okay. The observer is an observer. They're going in, they're there for, half an hour maybe. They see a little snippet of classroom life. What's most vivid to them in terms of what they can see? We can say, well, control they can see pretty clearly. Challenge, well, maybe a little bit. Clarify depends on whether something comes up that's not confusing, that gives the teacher an opportunity to show that they can clarify. Care, if the class is out of control, is care going to be very obvious to an observer? Okay, if the kids are kind of misbehaving, so care might not be.
I would imagine that if you walked into the classroom and you saw a lot of students that were help-seeking, raising their hand, participating, which I would think would be what, as an observer, I would think would be what I would look at as being efficient.
Okay, even if the the class is kind of a little out of control.
Well, on there it's moderate, so it's...
No, on control, B is low on control.
Okay, I was looking at the help, and it was A under moderate and B
All right.
under high. So
Yeah.
it's just...
Okay, well, I kind of mixed them up on purpose on here, because these could be real classrooms, right? So you got one classroom that is very much under control. The kids, they're so orderly, okay, because they're asleep. Because look, there's no challenge. They're low on challenge. They're okay on clarify, but they're also low on captivate, care and captivate. So A is very much under control, which is going to be the first thing you see, though, how orderly they are. But you may not necessarily know that the teacher doesn't challenge them, that they think the teacher doesn't care, the teacher never makes it interesting, that they don't really persist, and they're not really trying very hard. Okay, those things may not be that visible to the observer, right? In Class A or Class B, what you can see for sure that they're out of control. You may or may not have the opportunity to see this teacher is really good at clarifying things, and the kids know the teacher loves them. You might see that. And then down, help seeking is good in Class B. But the other thing, Class A, the kids have the highest sense of efficacy. The kids in Class A are acting like, yeah, we can do this. But is that a good thing? They're low on grit, they're low on challenge. They think they can do it because they haven't been asked to do anything. Right? You got a high sense of efficacy because they've never experienced failure because the teacher doesn't push them hard enough to fail on anything. Right? And so these are nuances that the kids can give you a clue on, but the observers really can't. And what we kind of find is that the observers can really, the very best classrooms and the very worst classrooms, they can distinguish pretty reliably. But the middle of the distribution is kind of murky. There's a lot of reverse rank orderings and things, and in the middle of the distribution, where the kids even get the middle of the distribution right, because they're there enough to be able to give you more reliable feedback, what's going on there. Peer dynamics, big thing, just quickly. Kids are trapped inside their peer culture. Most kids we see appear to have the same values as their parents and their teachers. They don't act like it because they think that if they did act like it, their friends wouldn't like them. And they're probably right that their friends would act like they didn't like them. Because we have what's called pluralistic ignorance in the literature. Pluralistic ignorance is when people misread one another's values and preferences and then conform their own behavior to what they think other people want them to do. Imagine this evening, you're kind of tired, you've been sitting here all day. You kind of want to go back to the room and have room service. Somebody says, hey, there's 6 of us that want to go out and have drinks and have dinner. You don't feel like it. But you know if you say no, it'll seem like you're antisocial. And you know some of these relationships might pay off later on, so you need to maintain these relationships. So you decide you're going to go out to dinner even though you don't want to. And then somebody else in the group says, no, I'm kind of tired, I'm going to turn in. You reach out and you grab them, you pat them on the back, say, come on, we're going to have a good time. You don't want to go yourself, right? And you can end up with 6 of you sitting around a table at some restaurant. None of you want to be there, but each of you is there because you think all the others want to be there. Okay. You can have the same thing of kids in the classroom. They're all misbehaving. None of them want to be misbehaving, but they're doing it because they think if they didn't join in the shenanigans, they'd get teased in the hallway after class, or somebody would give them a hard time. And they probably would get teased in the classroom by another student after class. They'd get teased by another student who themselves had wanted to behave and didn't behave. Okay? Evidence for this, we've got this chart here. No, you can't read it. It says list some things at your school that kids do so that other people will like them. These are middle school and high school kids. There are 1,400 kids. Open responses. Almost everything is negative. It's almost all mischievous that they've got in here. This is, put on my glasses just to tell you some of the kinds of things that are listed there. Antisocial behavior like fighting, cursing, indifference toward people, talking back, academically disruptive behavior like acting out, skipping class, cheating, stunts, not caring about school or acting like you don't care about school, showing off, copying other people, being peer pressured, sucking up, and so just a lot of negative stuff. Then we asked them, if you were in charge and you could set the rules for what's cool, what would you make cool? Work ethic, trying hard in school, going to class, being responsible, following rules, achieving your goals, being nice, respecting others, being fun, caring about family and friends, being interesting, making friends, respecting yourself, being who you are, spending time with who you want to, all positive stuff. Why are kids doing all that first stuff is if this is what they would make cool. They're doing it because they're trapped in their peer culture. And so we need what I'm calling a conspiracy to succeed. We need to organize the kids to undermine aspects of their own peer culture that get in the way of their own healthy development. Okay, and part of that is giving them opportunities to testify to one another about what they really think. Because right now they're afraid to say what they really think because they think other people think they're not cool. So everybody's pretending a certain set of things are cool, and nobody really thinks it is. It's like with people of color, there's the acting white accusation. Okay, the survey work we've done there suggests that nobody really thinks, very few people think that working hard and being ambitious and achieving high grades is acting white. But a lot of people think everybody else thinks it. So the best way to avoid being accused of acting white is to act like you don't really care about school. Okay? And by the way, even the white kids get accused of acting white when they have a lot of black friends. But if you're white, you're less likely to be accused of acting white the higher percentage white your school is. If you're black, you're more likely the higher percentage white your school is. Okay? But the interpretation of that phenomenon is one that most of the kids don't even believe, but they think everybody else believes it. The strongest predictor of actually being accused of acting white is liking rock music. Okay? And it's consistent for all the groups. The second strongest predictor is really interesting. It's trusting strangers. Trust in strangers. Get a little chuckle over from a person of color in the front row. You said, that sounds familiar. Right, we're taught sometimes, you can't trust anybody, especially if you don't know them, right? So, and then there are other things like being in the drama club, but there's there's a lot of confusion around what people actually believe and what they act like they believe on these things. And this is the one, it's like public goods, where no one individual is in a position to address it effectively. No one child can step forward and flip the peer culture. Okay, so they need help. They need adults to help organize it. There's one of the schools where I tried to kick this off, the high-achieving kids killed it. It was a suburban school, probably 30% white kids, and kind of evenly mixed between black and Latino kids. And the high-achieving white kids killed it. And there were 4 different meetings where we tried to kick it off. We were working through student organizations. And 4 different kids at 4 different meetings stepped up and asserted with total confidence that the only problem is those other kids just don't care about school. And so why would we use our time trying to do anything to make this a better school for them when they don't even want to help themselves? As one girl said, school is not hard, school is easy, you just have to do your work. They refuse to do their work, and that's not really our problem. Okay. But then when you meet with the kids who are kind of the middling on down, they see the need for it. Because they know a lot of the behavior that looks like it means that kids don't care about school is just pretending they don't care. The majority of kids, or slight majority of kids, acknowledge, and it's more than a slight majority for some groups, that sometimes they pretend they're not trying hard in school even when they really are. In other words, they hide effort. And one of the reasons to hide effort is if you think other kids think it's not cool and they're going to tease you if you look like you're too interested and working too hard. Another reason to hide effort is that you're actually struggling. And you don't want people to attribute your struggle to lack of ability. You'd rather have them attribute it to lack of effort. So you do everything you can to signal to everybody that the reason you're not doing well is that you don't care and you aren't trying to do well. I could do that if I'm trying. This stuff is stupid. I don't care. Nobody ever needs to know this stuff, right? And so it takes a certain kind of school culture, certain types of kind of community culture to free kids up to admit that they're struggling when they're struggling. It has to be one where they know they're not going to get teased and they know they're going to get effective support. So, and trying to create conditions where they know they're not going to get teased and they know they're going to get effective support may require working with parents and families and after-school programs and school organizations and teachers to be sure they can clarify that they really can provide effective support. And then, lo and behold, all the kids that seem not to care, all of a sudden are asking questions. Because now it looks like if they make the effort, they really can be successful. And I'm sure none of you has ever met a child who wants to fail. You've met a child once in a while who will act like they want to fail or who will tell you that they don't care. But it takes you about 10 minutes to cut under the surface of that in a conversation and get to it. The employers piece I talked about earlier, so I won't pause on that right now. The community piece, family supports for kids, for families that need support, and then places to come together to give folks places to belong and connect with other folks. And so we end up with those 10 outer circles, and I've said a little bit about each of those 10 outer circles. In most of our communities, there's already work happening in each of these outer circles. But the people are not viewing it as part of a movement. They're not seeing their efforts as mutually supporting. They don't celebrate together. They don't monitor and measure and report out and publicize what's happening with these various things. Okay, and so the aspiration here is to raise people's consciousness about the fact that there really is a movement already. Okay, I would suspect in most of your communities over the last 3, 4, 5 years, you've had an increased amount of effort, increased amount of energy around trying to help things happen better in your school systems and even outside. Community organizations stepping up, businesses stepping up, people just wanting to be involved. I had the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard. A couple times a week somebody calls me, private citizen starting up something new. One of the most interesting new things that there's a family filmmaking business, Rada Film, that's got a film that's going to come out this fall called An American Promise. He's a psychiatrist. She was a lawyer by training. They were also filmmakers. They had a little boy. They were concerned about the black male epidemic. And so they said, we have a black male child. Let's do a film about his life. And so they've got a documentary tracking him from kindergarten through 12th grade and all the issues that he runs into in one of the most exclusive schools in the country, the Dalton private school in New York City. and they tell his story and the story of one of his friends. It's a very touching movie. It's going to be out initially on PBS and then probably other places. They're trying to develop a movement around that movie. They've got all kinds of things. They've got a book that's coming out in the fall. So there are lots of people that are stepping up in all kinds of ways, contributing whatever they can. So I've talked longer than I was supposed to. I've not engaged you as much as I was supposed to, but I just had a lot I wanted to tell you. So why don't we pass the mic around for the last few minutes to folks who have questions or comments? Can we do that? Okay. There's a gentleman there. You have the mic over here. When you get wait time up to about 3 seconds, the whole classroom culture changes. Kids who never ask questions start to ask questions.
Thank you for your words, by the way.
Thank you.
Is this true for the adult learner in the system as well? The 7 C's
Yes.
apply to adult learning?
It all applies. You just take it up a level because it's basic human nature. Okay? It's basic human nature. And we also have surveys where you survey adults about what they experience as learners in the school community, where the principals and other administrative leaders are in the position of the teacher in the other model. But it's all the same stuff, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I enjoyed your presentation a lot today. I had a question about the survey with the students. Have you run across in your work any issues with teachers having a high level of anxiety and possibly trying to talk to the students before or impress the students about what the kind of answers they want them to give on the surveys?
That's a very reasonable fear, but it virtually never happens as far as we can detect. We actually, on the survey for the upper elementary and the secondary students, we actually have 2 questions that basically ask them. You know, is what you're telling us what you really think or what somebody else wants you to think or asked you to think? Or there are 2 questions where we check on that. But teachers are nervous until you assure them that they will be treated fairly. And so there are questions that they want to have answered. You know, who's going to see my classroom results? Often the first time we survey at the classroom level, we like to promise teacher nobody will see them but you. And we still show the district. I mean, everything I showed you today, I didn't show you any individual teacher level data. But you see a lot of patterns, okay? And so you can get all the patterns for the school or the district without knowing which teacher is which. The point that teachers will be more visible is when schools start to use this as part of their accountability formulas. And there are a few districts that are starting to do that. But even there, nobody in your building has to see it. I mean, if the district is handling the 5% or the 10 or 15% that reflects what the kid said, somebody at the district can put that in to the formula, right? So, but there are fears that teachers have, but we find that it's pretty easy to overcome those. Several years ago, I've been developing this since about 2002, I guess. And several years ago, when we test to see if they're duplicate answers, they're duplicate survey responses, we found one class where every kid, like almost 30 kids, had identically the same answers. All right. And the teacher who cheated got one wrong. There was one item where the best answer was really the opposite of what all the kids had answers. But the paper that I just finished that brings Tripod and Charlotte Danielson's framework together, particularly if you have both of those, they're really easy ways to detect cheating. Because there's either too little variation, okay? Because you can say, well, what did the kids tell me, and what did the observers tell me who watched the classroom? And you can standardize both of those to have the same average and the same level of variation. And then you can take the difference between them. If the difference is too little, it's very probabilistically unlikely that you would get that without something systematic causing the difference to be too little, okay? If the difference is too great, then there are certain magnitudes that are also very unlikely. It's really hard to rig it so you wouldn't be detected if somebody goes in and tries to follow up on that. I saw there was another hand up in this area a while ago.
Your work on the observations in the classrooms
yeah.
bring the question, the last 30 years of research have really questioned whether administrators going in and observing teachers has any reliability at all.
Right.
Your data makes me think it's even harder than that. So your comments to that, please.
Yeah, what the Gates Foundation saw was you really need about four different observations, ideally by at least two different observers, to get to around 60% reliability, which is kind of the lower bound of what we think is acceptable. So it's not that they're totally unreliable, but you need to multiple times by multiple observers to start to get there. And ideally, if it's going to have any high stakes for the teacher, it's at multiple points in time. And now you have to multiple measures, multiple times over multiple years before you start having it be high stakes. And over that period of time, the stuff averages out, and you'll start to see clear patterns in that. On single administrations, you're right, there's a lot of noise. But one of the arguments in favor of still having observations done is that if the way that you use them is to sit down and reflect together with the teacher on what's happening in their classroom, the person that's having that conversation has a lot more credibility if they've actually watched the classroom, if they've actually seen it. And if it's a classroom where maybe in the past you've done some survey work, and you've also got some past observations, you've got several data points to draw on in that conversation. And you've got those data points plus the credibility that comes from having actually watched and thought about what you're trying to see. So it's sort of both and, even though it takes more resources to do it all. I see a hand over there.
My question is, one, are we able to access your questions that you use for the students? So we could, especially for our school, to be able to look at that data and see what compares to what you have.
The surveys are delivered through Cambridge Education in Westwood, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And the 7 C's framework is trademarked, and so I'm not sure how they're handling all that. Okay. Luckily, I'm arm's length from it right now. But the questions themselves for this upper elementary and the secondary from the Gates project are on the Gates website.
Okay.
So you can go to the website and you can download them there for use in your school. I think the main time there's pushback is when another commercial entity starts using them and working with schools. And the issue is if a commercial entity is doing it, then they ought to come to us and come to Cambridge Education and work with us, since we spent the last decade developing the intellectual property on that. But in terms of a school using it, it's there. It's on the Gates website.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Is Harvard using this as a model for the new teachers that's going into the school system, or is this just still in the study?
It's not into the teacher training stuff much. It's just starting to put this toe in the water. And actually, this is something that I've done outside of Harvard. It's kind of associated.
Okay.
This grew out of a summer program in Shaker Heights, Ohio, when I was there as a consultant. Okay. And we've developed that outside of Harvard. Cambridge Education is an employee-owned business. It's actually grounded in Cambridge, England. Their U.S. headquarters is in Westwood, Massachusetts. And so they manage. I hooked up with them probably around 2004, 2005, because I'm a university person. I didn't want to be out marketing and managing all that kind of stuff. So they took that over, or at least Rob Ramsdale did, and he joined Cambridge Education. Rob Ramsdale is really the one that runs this from inside Cambridge Education. So part of what's happening now is that there are conversations going on between us and largely between Rob and even the National Association that does accreditation for teacher training. So it's very highly plausible that within the next few years, these kinds of surveys will be part of the accreditation process for new teachers after they've done their teacher training. And you can backtrack that into the training that teachers get, the preparation that they get to be teachers. But we're just starting to package it. I mean, this is the only reason that it's as popular as it is right now is that the Gates, these surveys were the only ones that were classroom level surveys that had been widely used at the point in time when the Gates Foundation started setting up the Measures of Effective Teaching project. Okay, then they used them, they discovered, lo and behold, these are the most reliable measures of what happens in classrooms. And now they're supporting the diffusion for use in schools. And also Race to the Top has made a difference because Race to the Top requires multiple measures. And so folks are using that. And so people are now debating, like Pittsburgh uses the 7 C's composite as 5% of its teacher accountability formula. Memphis does. Pittsburgh is considering 15%. But the question there, the state wants them not to use it as part of the student, because they want to use it in the 50% that the value added gains go in. The city wants to use this one, the tripod measure, as part of their student performance measure, which you can say does or does not make sense. But there are debates. It's all work in progress, so people are debating about exactly how you're going to use it. There are also debates that you shouldn't use this at all for accountability. You should use it in the background to inform professional learning, professional development. You could argue it either way, but it's work in progress. Hopefully 5 years from now, if you ask me that question, it'll be, yes, there's some very structured ways of in using it in teacher training, but that's sort of where we are.
Just one more. Have you ever taken the 7 C's and measured a community and the community's accountability as far as its care for children? Have you ever done that?
No,
because I could see where it would work.
We don't have a survey like that right now.
Okay.
You can imagine something. I mean,
I think it would.
You could argue. You could ask whether it might be some modification of the 7 C's. If you're, I mean, there are Minneapolis, exactly. That's what I'm trying to think of. What are they called? There is an organization that does a community climate survey that gets to some of this kind of thing. It's kind of almost too elaborate, but it's, yeah, I think there are people in the room who know what I'm trying to think of. But there are people who have surveys that do more closer to what you're talking about. And then you can imagine looking and asking them, are they getting at the issues you want them to get at? And they might or might not be. Okay. I should wrap up. And I'm going to do it with a poem, another one. I'm going to use the one that I just wrote a couple nights ago. That it's kind of 90% polished. Good enough. It's called Why Be an Educator, or Love Some Kids, Save Some Lives. I became an educator with the noblest of intentions. I would teach and nurture children as if they were my own. But I quickly came to learn that there were challenges awaiting, hurdles higher and more daunting than my mentors had foretold. At the start of each new school year, there were students in my classroom lacking skills and basic knowledge on which I had planned to build. So I had to spend the first few months reteaching basic concepts that my students sorely needed as foundations for new skills. It was difficult those first years to sustain my motivation. I felt oh so disillusioned, many days so unfulfilled. Till one day I came to realize that the job had deeper meaning than I'd ever stopped to realize while struggling to keep pace. The moment came one morning when a child I reprimanded stood with wistful resignation, no expression on her face. In that moment swelled a feeling I can only call commitment, just a stubborn resolution not to let this student fail. I began to speak the things I felt to help her know for certain that her life was too important, that she needed to prevail. I invited her to join me, just the two of us together, to begin a search relentless for a purpose or an interest. She began to ask me questions as she struggled there to trust me, questions focused on the reasons that someone like me might care. I responded that my purpose was to serve and nurture students, and that helping kids like her succeed was what I lived to do. I explained that she made possible my own self-realization as a person whose life mission was to teach and love and share. Then before my eyes, a light appeared, as she too found a purpose. Days no longer dull and pointless, no more blank and hopeless stares. Now she understood the reasons that her life and learning mattered. Such a rush of inspiration, such a twinkle in her eye. She embraced with all her heart the quest to someday be a teacher, so that she, like I, could someday love some kids and save some lives. So I'm done.